In chapter 2. Before we do that, I'm going to ask you if you would join me in a word of prayer, and then we'll get started. Our Father in heaven, we're grateful for another beautiful day, a first day of the week, and on the morning of that first day, we started all by assembling here, and above all things, considering and thinking about the sacrifice that's been made for us so that we can have a relationship with you. We'll also take that opportunity this morning, Father, to come together as a congregation and sing hymns of praise to you, and to offer these prayers, but to study from your word. And that's what we're going to do this morning for the next 45 minutes. We ask for your support, your help. We ask for wisdom as we do this. We ask that you give us open minds and open hearts and think about the things that are said here, and think about the things that we read. Be with all of those who are trying their best to open up your word and share it with others this morning. And we ask all these things in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen. All right. So I want to start with, what have we learned up to this point in the book of Nehemiah? We looked at the first two chapters. Scott was awesome for the last couple of weeks getting us through Nehemiah 1 and 2. What have we learned so far? What's resonated with you at this point? Like, what sticks out? Maybe something you hadn't thought about in a long time or never thought about before? What's been the key points that we've discussed? Jack?
Something that was new for me is just the grand scope of what all he asked the king. Being different nation, he's not Persian. Hey, I need to go over here and do this, and by the way, can you pay for all the materials? I know you really like me, so I'm going to be gone. I mean, just the grand scope of what it was, plus the fact that when you approach the king, you're taking your life in your hands. All that.
Right. Nehemiah has to approach the king. Nehemiah is the one who's writing this account, so we're getting his account in hindsight of what happened with all of this. And Nehemiah tells us, hey, I had to go to the king. And we know he had an important role. Someone can fill that detail in. But he's got some kind of a relationship with the king, but it's not an easy ask, right? He's got to ask something significant. He's got to ask something big. It might be an inconvenience for the king. But most importantly, he needs the king's help a little bit in all of this too, right? Excellent. Zach?
What I like so far in reading Nehemiah is how he really owns this, and it was pointed out that God did not go tell him to do this task, and how he took it upon himself. And then when he's asking God for help, he includes himself in the problem and takes ownership, even though, as it's been pointed out, he wasn't one of the ones that was originally there when they go into captivity. And so the ownership that Nehemiah takes in this task upon himself really has stood out.
Yeah, that's a great observation, Zach. We read many things in the Bible where the account says, look, God came to someone and said, this is what I want you to do, or this is what needs to happen, or this is what has got to take place, go and make it happen. In this account, Nehemiah, who's writing this, I think would have told us if God said, hey, I want you to go rebuild this. Now, God clearly blesses this work. God's clearly behind all of this work, but Nehemiah comes to himself on this and says, hey, I'm sad about this. This is not good for these people. I'm going to take it upon myself to see if I can do something here. A little bit of a man of action when it comes to that. Good. What else? Anything else? Russ?
We talked a lot about it, but I just like the fact how he was so moved with compassion when he found out what had happened, the destruction. And then the fact that as soon as he found out there in verse 4, it says he sat down and he prayed, he mourned and prayed. So it's not like he was sitting and wringing his hands. He realized that there was a task before him, but he went to God with this.
Yeah, and it was interesting. I don't remember the exact time, but it kind of reads like, he gets the information. He's like, I'm going to go do this. And the next day he goes and does it. There seems to be some time that he reflects on this and thinks about this and is probably praying deeply about it and talking to other people about it and considering what he should do about it. But he does take that time to kind of work through that and kind of figure out what he needs to do. Mike?
I like how he planned everything out. Not only was he praying, kind of what Russ said, he's praying to God that he has success, but he forms a plan. He forms a plan in his mind. He knows who he needs to talk to there in Jerusalem. He knows the people that he's going to ask to help. And I think when he gets there, he hits the ground running.
Yeah.
Everything's already set up in his mind. He's got a, as Scott was saying, as a project manager, you look at the whole project and you start filling in your needs and where materials you need to fill, manpower. And I think when he gets there, he surveys it, but he already has a plan. And he knows who's going to help him.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I really like that. One of the things we've talked about is that Nehemiah is an opportunity to learn about leadership. And we see just in those first 2 chapters, Nehemiah's leadership involves knowing what to do, knowing what he thinks he needs to do, but he's a planner. We kind of finished on that in the last class where he makes it back to Jerusalem. And first thing he does is he goes out at night and he surveys the scene, right? He walks around or rides around and kind of checks everything out and figures out what is the depth of the problem, what are we going to have to do to tackle this, and that's all going to be really important, I think, when we dive into chapter 3, because we start to see some of that unfold a little bit. Troy.
His reliance on God is impressive. It means he prays to God before he goes before the king, and then after he does all his work and all his planning, he says it's because of the hand of God that I got it. So I think it's just really impressive to see that.
Yeah, very true and sincere partnership with God on this. He understands this is just not his work, and he understands why he's doing this, and he knows that there is glory to God for this and that this is necessary for God's people. Ed.
Well, one of the things Scott emphasized was the fact that the humility that he showed when he came on the scene was that he, of course, went around and saw what the needs were, but he didn't pull rank or anything. He said, okay, here's the mess we're in. We need to do something about this. And what's astonishing is that he doesn't say, here are the blueprints. Here's what we're going to do. He sort of says, let's do this. And the people themselves could build a consensus. And it appears that they came up with a plan. And this is more true to leadership than people think.
Yeah.
This is how it really works on the ground a lot of the time. And we're in love with top-down management. There are times for top-down management. God has a top-down management. But really, when you're dealing with a project, very often you've got to build a consensus among the stakeholders and have them set up a plan.
Yeah, I love that. I've been responsible for being a leader, and the 2 biggest mistakes I've made were, let's go do this with no plan, like to Mike's point, 0 plan. We're just gonna go. Wrong. The other one is I put a great plan together and I think I got this now, and you run out there and do it and it fails miserably, and you come back and I'm like, why did that not work? And you realize I didn't talk to anybody. Like, I asked a bunch of people to do a bunch of things or told them what needed to be done, but I did not involve them in that process in any way. And so those 2 things are coming up in Nehemiah's leadership so far, and they're very important. And when we get into chapter 3, you're going to see the people, right, actively involved in this. Terry.
Yeah, the other thing, in addition to all these great points, the thing I learned, this uncanny ability that Nehemiah has to be confident, to be a leader, to be strong, and to know what needs to be done. But then at the same time, he realizes what he doesn't know. He asked God twice to be attentive to his prayer.
Yeah.
He did not assume that God was going to listen to him. And when he went to the king to ask, he said, if it please the king. That's difficult to do, to be confident, to be strong, to get this done. But then at the same time, you have to take it down. Yeah.
Hey, you got to try to figure out what you don't know. You got to be humble along the way, right? To figure out that, all right, this next step, I need to bring in some expertise. He does all of those things. Aaron, you're going to have the final word on this little review. Go.
Something that's resonated with me is just seeing God's providence and his faithfulness. So he does listen to his servants, and like Troy said, it was a partnership between Nehemiah and God. God did hear him, and God is faithful.
Yeah, I like that, Aaron. it's not surprising that, as someone said, Nehemiah has compassion, because Nehemiah seems to be a man of God, and God has compassion. So Nehemiah has tapped into that, this concern and this care for people, and you can sense God's compassion about this situation and wanting to help Nehemiah, and you can sense Nehemiah's compassion for the people, and that kind of gets us up to and sets us up for a lot of the awesomeness that is in Nehemiah chapter 3. All right, here's the deal. So here's how these classes work. I love getting to co-teach with other people. And the way this particular class worked is Dave went out and recruited some people. And he recruited Scott, and he recruited Grant, and he recruited me and said, would you guys like to help teach the Nehemiah class? We all leapt at it. I would love to. So then, well in advance, because that's how Dave works, he sends out a schedule. And he says, okay, here's the schedule. And he asks, like, when are you available and when might be some times you're not available? He takes all that information together and he says, hey, here's the schedule for Nehemiah. It's going to be great. Looking forward to it. And I get the email and it's in a spreadsheet and I'm eager to find out what is my assignment. And so I open up the little schedule and I scan for my name and I see that, what is today, the 21st? I see that on Sunday the 21st I'm up and I see that my assignment is Nehemiah chapter 3. So what do? Because I don't know if you know this, but I don't go, oh, I know exactly what that's about. I'm like, I need to find out what Nehemiah chapter 3 is about. So I open up my Bible, I click on my little Bible app, I open up Nehemiah chapter 3, and I look at it, and the first thing that jumps out is it's all Hebrew names of places and people, and it may as well have been written in Hebrew. Because I'm staring at it going, are you kidding me? I've got one of these. Number one, I don't know how to even pronounce these names, and we've all been there, and you just kind of gloss over them and hope you got it somewhere close to correct. But number two, and more importantly, even if I could pronounce every single one of these names, like, what is this? And how am I going to stretch this into 45 minutes? Like, how do you, like, milk this thing for all it's worth and get 45 minutes out of it? So the next thing I do is like, well, what's my next assignment? And I go back and I find out, oh, Wednesday, the 24th. Well, at least I'll get to do something on Wednesday, the 24th that's different than Nehemiah chapter 3. And I look and it says, chapter 3, Nehemiah. Not only are we having to do this in one 45-minute session, two 45-minute sessions, that's 90 minutes that we have to cover Nehemiah chapter 3. And I'm thinking, Grant and Scott and Dave are, as the kids would say, they're punking me right now. They're all at home laughing. They're laughing that I've been given Nehemiah chapter 3. And I'm thinking, okay, if that's the way it's going to be, you can insert your joke here of if anybody could talk for 90 minutes and really not talk about anything, it's Dave Bird. I've made those jokes myself. But I'm thinking, I'm going to do this because I have resources and I have tools. And right there on my app, I hit my little blue letter Bible app, which I will sometimes go to because they have commentaries. And I'm going to pull a commentary. And I open up the commentaries, and I go right to this commentary that says, verse by verse, textual commentary. Verse by verse. 31 verses. I'm about to get the meat and potatoes. And this is what it says. Chapter 3. And in chapter 3, you have the names of all the families and the section of the walls where they would be working. And because the names are really insignificant to us, we're not going to wade through chapter 3, but go on to chapter 4. So I reach out to Dave, and I reply all to the email, and I say, just curious, is there any material, any information? Because if you've ever worked with Dave, and you know, one of the beautiful things about working with Dave is he puts together great quality, like professional level materials and resources for these classes. And Dave replied to the email and he said, I did do, here's some material. And I'm like, phew. He said, I did this with the elders back during the pandemic when we were talking about leadership. And I'm like, that's all I need. I just need something to go by. And he said in the email, however, I'm really looking forward to what you guys have to say and what you can teach us about this and what information you can give this. So I scramble and I open up this PDF and I'm super excited to find out what Dave is going to give me, 7 to 10 questions that we can kind of work with on Nehemiah chapter 3. And this is what it says. Chapter 3 is primarily a record of those who rebuilt the wall and the gates from the sheep gate to the sheep gate. Why does the Holy Spirit include lists of names like this? What purpose does it serve? Choose a few little nuggets of gold that you find in the otherwise monotonous listing of builders. Does this chapter say anything about leadership? Chapter 4. So there we go. That's our next 90 minutes this week of what we're going to do with chapter 3. But then I thought about this. We have two things going for us. The first thing is we have 31 verses of God's Word in Nehemiah chapter 3 that are filled with a lot of information if we're willing to work at it. And the second thing I got going for me is I have this group right here. I have the brothers and sisters in Christ at the Folsom congregation that I've known for 30 years who I'll bet you we could do a whole quarter on Nehemiah chapter 3 if we pushed ourselves. So, what we're going to start with this morning is I would love to hear just quickly what nuggets of gold you have found in this otherwise monotonous listing of builders. And I'm not looking yet for application. I'm just looking for when you read through this and you tried to pull some things out that you thought were interesting, things that you thought were, that's odd, or that's unusual, or that's different, or that's weird, or that's quirky, or I didn't know that, or why is that there if that's over here? What are some of the things that you found? Steve?
Well, in verse 9, they talk about why the son of Hur, where he's related to Ben-Hur.
Okay, I saw that too. There's, someone from Hur, right? And the first thing I thought of was like, Ben-Hur. Is there any connection to that? I did notice that. That's interesting. We watched the same movies 25 years ago. All right, Brian.
Verse 12, Shallum and his daughters.
Okay. When you're cruising through it, and it several times will say the men, and these men did this, and then the men got over here, then you find this one guy, and it says, like, he dragged his daughters out there and made them work. Or his daughter said, we're going out there, and we're going to be a part of this. So we get that little interesting piece of information. We'll get a chance to talk about that and why we think that might be important. Angie.
Lots of rulers and important people doing the work, they're not just lay people. But I just thought it seems like there's the ruler of this and the ruler of that.
Yeah.
That's not often what you see when you've got people doing hard work like that. It's usually the guys from the Home Depot parking lot,
Yeah, exactly.
They're not important because they are, but I'm just saying they're not usually rulers.
Yeah, exactly. And we got to think about that. Like, here comes Nehemiah. I'm the cupbearer for the king, and I got notes and I got money. But these guys are rulers of this area. And somehow, when he rallies the troops, he's able to get the rulers to be involved in this, and some people that are already in a leadership position. Dave, and then Aaron.
Just the variety of different people and their skill sets. We often think of, this must have been just a bunch of workers who used to building walls and all this, but
Right.
you see in verse 8, talking about the goldsmiths, the perfumers, people who wouldn't normally be associated with building a wall.
Right.
It wasn't like, all the bricklayers go and do this and the rest of us just hang out.
Right.
This is everybody all coming together.
Yeah, and in fact, one of my thoughts was, if they had team wall builder, they probably would have got this wall done a while back, right? They clearly don't have the organization, the leadership, the motivation for this, but nobody was grabbing their tools and getting after it. And, the perfumer shows up, and you'd think they go, hey, Jim, we don't need perfuming on this project. But the answer is no. We need anybody who has a mind to work, right? Anybody who wants to do this. We will take you. We need you. We need people who are motivated and people who care about this project. Aaron.
I thought it was interesting in verse 5, it says that the Tekoites repaired, but their nobles would not stoop to serve the Lord. And then later on it says that the Tekoites repaired another section, but no mention of the nobles there. So I'm like,
Love it.
Did they participate the second time, maybe? I don't know.
Yeah. We're cruising along, and you're like, you hear the Rocky theme music playing, like everyone is just like, let's go, and it just feels like this inspirational, like Scott was talking about on Wednesday, like the Amish all show up, and they're just going to raise the barn. I mean, it's just awesome. But then Nehemiah's got to throw in there, but their nobles, really couldn't put the shoulder to the work. They really had no interest in getting dirty, it seems like, or getting committed to this. And there's a little bit of a hint of that's in contrast to what everybody else was doing, but kind of a, come on, nobles, like step up. And then there are several times where it mentions that a group of people or a person was involved in this place over here and was involved in this place over here, and that's one of those groups of people, and he doesn't have to throw in, apparently later, their nobles wouldn't do anything. It sounds like they were like, why don't you guys go over there and do something else and make yourselves look busy. Very good observation. Mike, then Roy.
Just going, verse 5 got hit me too about the Tekoites. You're from a city, and there's several cities. Jericho was mentioned. So people from cities around.
Yeah.
That was really interesting. And then, what's Tekoa known for? And I was thinking, well, wasn't Amos from Tekoa?
It was.
Yeah, he
Yeah.
was from there.
Yeah.
And so what does Amos, the 9th chapter, say? He says that the people, after the exile, are going to come back and rebuild the walls. 9:14. I just thought that was really interesting.
Yeah.
It's just a little nugget. They're in the middle of all of these names.
Yeah, Mike's mining gold nuggets. That's good. Roy.
I saw verse, looking for it again here, it struck me. Verse 7, it says that these were men of Gilead and Mizpah, and Mizpah was the seat of the governor of the province beyond the river. And then if you go down to verse 15, it says, Shallum, the son of Kol-Hoseh, ruler of the district of Mizpah, repaired the fountain gate. So I'm a little in doubt that all of these people were Jews that helped build the wall. I think they actually recruited some of what would later become Samaritans, that were placed in there, by the Persians.
Yeah. Yeah.
Before. So I'm not so sure that they were all Jewish people that did it.
Yeah, and we don't have, I'm fairly, in fact, I'm totally convinced that it's not just saying, this one guy showed up. When it's given the name of somebody, it's saying, he and his people and his family and his sons, and that's why they have to specifically call out the daughters later from someone. But there's a group of people that are showing up, and I think it's fair to say, number one, to Mike's point, it's not just everybody who's inside the broken down walls of Jerusalem that is pitching in to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. That they get people from villages all over the place, and it's quite possible, maybe even probable, that some of those people are not Jewish people, but for whatever reason, they care about what's happening here and want to be involved in it. Zach.
I think it's interesting that it starts with the high priest and the priests. If they're the first ones
Yeah.
to do the building, right?
Yeah.
I think that's significant. I mean, they're the spiritual leaders, but they're also taking the lead in this work as well.
Yeah, and we'll talk about this in a second, but they hit it at the sheep gate, and the sheep gate would have been right there near the temple, and the sheep gate was important to that. And so that might be part of some of the planning and some of what is thought out here. All right, Wes.
There's a lot of detail here, and I think that's important. One of the criticisms sometimes we hear of the Bible is, this is just a bunch of made-up stories that people put down. If you're looking to create and fabricate something, you don't like detail. We talk about that a lot, especially in the Gospels. The Gospel of Luke is one that has a lot of historical facts that can be fact-checked. I think this is a good example of that.
Okay.
Where I would assume that these people are not only people contemporary at this time, but later on, the Jews kept genealogical records. You could probably look these people up to the time of Jesus. If Nehemiah is writing this and making this up, he's not going to include details like these are the gates and the order of the gates around the city, around the wall, and here's the people that actually did the work.
Yeah, I love that. We're going to come back to that. I'm going to take a couple more, and then I want to dive into this. I'm going to go Grant and then Forrest.
You have a couple of times, one in verse 10 and one in verse 23, where it talks about people preparing opposite their own homes.
Yeah.
So you have either people volunteering for that or being assigned to these that would be of personal interest.
Yeah, yeah. I tend to think that probably speaks to the reasonableness and logicalness of, all right, it'd make most sense if you guys start right here out in front of your own home. That's going to be nice and efficient. Other times, because of a variety of different reasons, maybe that wasn't going to work out, or maybe because people lived in places that there wasn't anything broken near or around their home. So But you see that towards the end especially, that's the way Nehemiah describes as they just worked in front of their own home. They built the part right in front of their own place, right where they dwelt. Forrest.
So, looking at this, there's a lot of gates here. And when you look at chapter 1, verse 3, it says the gates were destroyed by fire. Well, when I first read that, I think, oh, it's the main gate that goes in. It's destroyed by fire because that's how the enemies come. No, we're talking all the gates around the city are destroyed. There's a lot of gates.
A lot of gates.
And all these people are pitching in at different points to repair these gates.
Yeah. I think that's, let's talk about that a little bit. I asked you, because one of my ways of like trying to annoy you into actually digging into this a little bit and making you read it multiple times was to do some counting. How many different repair locations around Jerusalem does Nehemiah mention in chapter 3? Does anybody want to throw a number out? Of course my dad does. Yeah.
Well, I kept getting confused, but I came up with 48.
That's exactly right. And the reason that's exactly right is you're my dad, and I'm not going to challenge that. But that's probably really, really close, okay? Here's what I noticed. I broke this down a little bit. There's 12 proper names of locations in, but mostly, I think to Mike's point, around Jerusalem. Like, not just inside of Jerusalem, but outside of Jerusalem. Villages like Jericho, Tekoa, Gibeon, and some of these other places, okay? Those are just the specific names that might be difficult to pronounce. But to Dad's point, along with that, there's at least, depending on, we don't know exactly what this might look like, but there's at least 33 specific landmarks in Jerusalem that he references throughout all of this. There's towers, there's pools, there's people's houses, there's the angle in the corner. I like that part. Some translations might say the buttress. This reads a little bit like, as Nehemiah is writing it, everybody knows the neighborhood. Like, he can say down by the oak tree, but over to the left by the gate, by the school, where the water tower is, kind of thing. And everybody's like, yeah, we know exactly what you're talking about. When he talks about the angle, or the corner, or the buttress, okay? And adding that up, it comes to like 45 different things. And that just means I missed 3 that my dad got, clearly. But there's a lot of specific locations and specific details. And then there's these 10 gates. And the 10 gates are important. We've talked a lot about they rebuilt the walls, they rebuilt the walls, they rebuilt the walls. But they had to rebuild gates. And why are gates a big deal in all of this? Why would gates be so important? Why do you think they'd be important? Forrest.
The outer gates are protection against the enemy.
Yeah, the walls themselves are what, Jerusalem's awesome because it's up on a hill and that protects you. David picked this all out when he was trying to find a place, right? And the hill protects you, but then they build walls to protect you, but it would be foolish to build a city that's just one giant wall, because then all of a sudden somebody's going to go, hey, we can't get in and we can't get out. So they had to put gates in, and the gates create a little bit of a vulnerability, right? But they're absolutely necessary to have those gates because things and people and resources need to come in and out of that. And those gates are cool because they're named for exactly what happens at that gate, right? You got the picture of what gates are. This phrase gets used a lot, so we get a little bit of insight into what these gates might look like because they keep saying that a particular group of people laid its beams, put its doors and its bolts and bars in place. There's the basic guts of a good solid gate. There's some beams, there's some bolts, there's some bars. They're designed to be secure, but they required some specific work. They probably required some high-skilled labor to be able to do all of that, and these gates are really important. There's 10 of them mentioned in this section. They're not all being repaired. They're just reference points around the city, but those gates seem to be really important and really significant to this work. This is a little bit of what it might have looked like. Jerusalem during this time period, think of like a handle and an axe kind of thing. It's a little more narrow down here and a little wider up here. There's the temple. The temple's up to the north. This would be north. There's your temple as a reference point. Richard Harvey, when I got here, said the same thing that I was thinking I don't think he ever mentions the temple once in all of this. Like the temple never comes up. It's all about these walls and all of these gates. If you move down from north to south, you get down here and you're going to be in what was the old city, right? Where David originally started things. And then out to the west and out to the east would be very well known to us because you got the Valley of Kidron down here. And later, during the time of Jesus, the Mount of Olives would be right over here. And he would often go over to the Mount of Olives and come back and forth. But this is sort of a valley down here hanging off of a cliff, the way this is built. And then you've got all of these little dwellings and villages that are outside these gates. So that's a little bit of what it would look like. The clicker doesn't work if you get too far away from it. I have to have frames of reference. We often think things are bigger than they really are. When historically we're reading about something, we get it to the point where it's super big. What you are looking at is a little sliver across the street of Briggs Ranch. And as best we can tell, the circumference around the walls of Jerusalem was approximately 1.6 miles. It's the estimation of what that first picture looks like. So if you want to do something today to just get a feel for it, you could leave here and you could go down East Natoma and you could hang a right over here where the Taco Bell is, and you could head down Blue Ravine until you get to that park. There's the Economy Park over here on your left, but you could hang a right and you could go by this Eli Parazzo or whatever park that's over here and swing all the way down here on Manso Drive and then swing back up this way and head back up towards the building on Briggs Ranch Drive. And you could drive by my brother's house and say hi to him, and the Sandersons live over here somewhere, and I think Luke Garcia and his family are down in here, and that's about it. That's about 1.6 miles. Now, that seems small to me. That's not even a neighborhood in our modern way of looking at this. It's a piece of a neighborhood, right? It's a piece of a neighborhood. But then just think about building walls for that. Think about building, and not building, rebuilding, repairing, and doing all of the work that's involved in 1.6 miles of that, and that hopefully gives you a little bit of perspective about what we're talking about. All right. Jack Horak, will you help me out, please? I need you to come up here and you're going to advance this. Jack had no idea this is happening. I told him at some point this might happen, Jack. Do you need to know details? He said, I do not. The clicker, I can't make it work from way back here, but if I stand up there, I can't see it. You're just going to hit the arrow when I tell you. That's backwards. Okay. Hit the first one. Boom, there's the sheep gate right there. Okay, you ready? There's the sheep gate. So we're going to work our way counterclockwise around the city the way Nehemiah wrote this, right? He's working counterclockwise around the city. There's the sheep gate. It's up by the temple. Hit the next one. Then it's going to take us to the fish gate. The sheep gate. What went through the sheep gate? Sheep. Now, these were sheep generally believed to be part of the sacrifices that were happening at the temple. So what do you think went through the fish gate? Fish. There's a fish market out there, and they're really creative names like Fish Gate. Let's just name it, what it is. We call it Briggs Ranch. Why? I don't know. Some guy named Briggs had a ranch. Hit the next one. Okay, this is the old gate or the gate of, I can't pronounce it real well and I can't see it, but yeshiva, but that's mentioned in there. Hit the next one. This is the broad wall. Talks about they worked up to the broad wall, and there's pieces of this that still remain. It's a pretty large wall. That was an effort to fortify some of that other area over in the western hill. Hit the next one. This is the Tower of the Ovens that's mentioned in there. They talk about they worked on the wall up to the Tower of the Ovens. And then, next one, the Valley Gate. They worked up to the Valley Gate, then they kept going. The Valley Gate, by the way, it just goes out to the Central Valley, The Dung Gate, Eric Fields. You were the one who texted me about the Dung Gate, were you not? Eric Fields, what happens at the Dung Gate? Trash. I like it, Eric. Only Eric could come up with a great way of saying, this was refuge. Somehow, some way, waste and stuff has to get out of the city. And this Hinnon Valley over here, by the way, what would that, Ed, what would we know that more? Gehenna. When we hear people talk about Gehenna, and Jesus talks about Gehenna, And they use Gehenna to kind of describe like hell, to describe like what's outside of God's kingdom, where you don't want to get caught and where you don't want to be, and where children were sacrificed by some of these kings. That's a bad place to be. And not surprisingly, the dung gate is what you go in and out to get through into that area. Next one. Okay, we're down here in the southern part of it, and we're down near the house of David and where David's original old city was. This is the wall of the pool of Siloam. This is mentioned in the New Testament when Jesus tells a man who was born blind to go wash in the pool of Siloam and be healed. That happens down there. Next one. There's the fountain gate that's down there. Next one. It talks about the house of heroes and the stairs from the city of David. Those would be right there in that area. And by the way, I'll say, this is what archaeologists think, right, are these places. And some of them they verified, some of them might look kind of like it, and some of them probably have a parking lot over them today. I know Russ has been there and he can see some of that, but this is their efforts to excavate and understand what this would have all looked like back in the day. Next one. Talks about the king's pool. They built to the king's pool, and they say across from the, next one, tombs of David. So that's all down there, right there. Keep going. Next one. This is the high priest's house. So this is the house of where the high priest would have been. Next one. This is the water gate that is up there. Next one. Where they say they built towards the wall of, and across from the wall of Ophel. It talks about people who were servants at that, priests, I think, at that wall are mentioned there. Next one, they talk about the horse gate. Next one, they talk about the, it's a different name for it. The muster gate, it comes up in some places. That gate is up there. Next one. The east gate, it was not one they said they worked on, but they referenced someone who was the servant at the east gate, or the guard of the east gate is one of the workers. Next one. Is that it? Yes. That's it. Okay. So those are all of these locations, and I bring that up to Wes's point because there's a ton of detail. There's a ton of detail that's in here, and it's validating to read that detail, and it's helpful for building our faith when we get an understanding that all of these things seem to be mentioned in Nehemiah. That at the time, everyone would have gone, oh, we know exactly who you're talking about, and we know exactly what you're talking about. It made sense to them. So let's talk about the people. How many different people or groups of people were involved in the rebuilding of the gates and the walls? How many? Okay, Dad, I'm going to give it to you again.
I had 53.
It's 100% spot on right. It's got to be. 53 different people are mentioned. So good. I don't know. Did anybody get a different number? I saw another hand. Terry.
Just real quick, not to that specific question, just wanted to add real quick what goes on at the gates. So the protection, you fortify a city, you protect the gates. There's some source texts. Ruth chapter 4, verse 1. Boaz met the potential redeemer at the gate of the city. So that's where the elders of the city would meet. Proverbs chapter 31, the virtuous woman supports her husband at the gates of the city. So the elders there, they know who he is. There's a reputation. So there's this business transaction.
Love that.
And the business of the city is communicated at the gates of the city as well.
Yeah, I love that because the gates are going to be high traffic, high profile areas. Again, depending on what's moving through that gate. But some of these gates were the main entrance or one of the main entrances for that side of the city. And as a result of that, you're going to see a lot of important things, a lot of business happen in there. When we talked about different groups of people that build, merchants were one of those people, one of those groups of people that are building during this time period. Okay? So with these people, we have a lot of people that are referenced in this. I came up with, in my effort to kind of break this down, oh man, do we have to go back through this again? There it is. Okay. 67 proper names of people are mentioned. 67 different proper names of people are mentioned in all of this. Some of them twice. Sometimes same name, different person. How would we know that? son of, right? We get the same name, but we get they're the son of a different person. So sometimes we've got the same person mentioned more than once. Other times we get son of, and there's 31 times that fathers or grandfathers are mentioned in this. Sometimes they say son of, who was the son of. And why Nehemiah did that, I don't know. It's really important, I think, to some sort of family lineage component of this. And it's quite possible that son and dad and grandpa were all working together on some of this. That's possible. There's 36 identified workers, specific names of people that they identify as that was a worker who did something, plus their families. And as was said earlier, men, priests, Levites are mentioned, rulers are mentioned, sons are mentioned, and daughters are mentioned, right, in all of this. Aaron.
Some of the names, I didn't go through every single one of them, but some of the names are repeated from the very end of Ezra, where there's a condemnation of people, of men who have intermarried, and there's a giant list of names there. Obviously, different people because time has passed, but same names, a lot of the same names. So it makes you wonder, family, generation down from some of these people. And so it's interesting that it's like a condemnation on one end, and this is sort of a redemption here.
Yeah.
Calling them out.
Yeah, I love that. And when we talk on Wednesday about themes that are in this section, and we talk about repair is a word that's going to come up over and over and over again. I want you to be thinking about this idea of repairing something that's lost or broken or fractured. Certainly works with gates and walls, but it works with people. It works with people, and it works with human beings. Luke.
Kind of in that same line, one of the things that stuck out to me, because I like looking at maps and numbers and how things go, the people from the inhabitants of Zanoah, that 1,000 cubits is about somewhere between 1,500 and 1,800 feet. That's almost a fifth of the whole wall's circumference.
Right.
And I was like, that's incredible. Then I looked up Zanoah, it's way off to the west. Like, it's one of those outlying villages way up the west. I'm like, what is up with this name Zanoah? So I start looking it up. It only appears a few times in the Bible, but then I look up the Hebrew. Zanoah, the word, means forgotten or deserter.
Interesting.
So the people of the town of the forgotten or the deserters come and show up. And they put together a fifth of this wall that's this big, long chunk with no fancy gates on any one. They're just doing this big, long chunk.
Yeah.
I'm assuming it's from the Valley Gate around to the Dung Gate approximately, based on what we're reading there. And that's just a huge endeavor for that group of people doing. Maybe that section had fewer chunks missing or something that they repair, but that is still a huge piece of what happened there.
Yeah. I love that. They're way out west. They come to that spot on the western side of the city, and they work about 5 football fields worth of wall that they are repairing. We talked about how residents of people in villages outside Jerusalem, are involved in this. And then, like Dave Sanderson mentioned, goldsmiths, merchants, temple servants, perfume makers. It's an awesome endeavor. It's an awesome endeavor. And when I think about, like, why Nehemiah? Why are you giving us Nehemiah chapter 3? And when I go back to Dave's question about mining it, for nuggets, I'm like, Dave's right. There's so much when we think about this and when we consider this, of somebody sitting down and telling their story of a group of people congregating, like coming together, trying to get something accomplished for the good of themselves, for the good of God. It's really inspiring to see all of the different angles that goes. And so here's what I want you to do for Wednesday. we're going to come back to some of this, but I want you to be thinking about something. Because I was trying to apply this, and I thought, what would it be like if we had Nehemiah right now come to us and say, hey, I need everybody to get together. And then Nehemiah wrote the story, and he talked about the people and what they did and how they were involved and how they came from all kinds of different walks of life. And it reminds me of what it's like to be a congregation of people, a group of people that have a purpose and have, as Scott talked about, a community built on something. Ours is built on Jesus Christ. And I want you to just think about, because we have a lot of history in this room and a lot of experiences in this room. Think about a time when you were a member of a local congregation that came together to accomplish something specific. Not just the basic work of God and the work of the church, which is super important, but there was something that needed to be done. And they said, to some degree, let us rise and build, like they said in Nehemiah 2:18. And they said they had a mind to work, like it says in Nehemiah 4:6. It could be this congregation, it could be another congregation. It could be physical work, it could be spiritual work. It could be the whole congregation or a group of people got together to try to do something. And I'd like to see if anyone's willing to share their story when we come back together on Wednesday. What were the challenges? Why were the people successful? How was the leadership? And how was the followership? We're going to talk about followership on Wednesday, and we're going to talk about teamwork on Wednesday. And if you've got a story to share and an experience, feel free to bring it. Thanks very much for your time. Thank you, Jack, for being my slide advancer. You're awesome. We'll pick it up.